But first, the foiled terrorist attack that police say would have been the worst in the nation's history. Today, a Victorian Supreme Court jury found 3 men, 2 of Lebanese descent and a Somali, guilty of planning a shootout at Holsworthy Army Base in Sydney. 2 other men were acquitted. The group was strongly opposed to Australia's involvement in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The prosecution said the plot was hatched between February and August the 4th last year, when the 5 were arrested in a massive police raid in Melbourne. For his views on today's verdict and how security agencies will respond to it, a short while ago I spoke to national security expert Carl Angra, who is in our Melbourne studio. Carl Angra, the AFP said they had a strong case against all 5 men. Are you surprised by today's outcome?
Not really, because as we've seen in previous trials, particularly here in Victoria, the bar has been set very high by the Supreme Court in terms of securing prosecutions, particularly on evidence that is on terrorism-related trials, because, of course, under the law, it's only acts preparatory to terrorism that these people were committed for, and that doesn't seem to have been proven in all cases this time, as it wasn't in previous cases such as the Benbrika trials.
Would these agencies be trying to keep track of the 2 men acquitted, and how would they do that?
Well, the interesting thing about this particular case was that the first identification of individuals as espousing extremist views came from the community itself. So perhaps it's working within those communities that are the crucial aspect of identifying individuals like this.
And of course the suspected mastermind of the plot is still at large. I presume the hunt is still on for him?
Absolutely, and not just him, but we've heard reports previously there are 80 to 100 individuals across Australia who are of interest to the intelligence and police services, and that work is going to be the work of years, if not decades.
Does this verdict today, in your view, raise questions about whether our counter-terrorism laws are too open to interpretation? Are they tough enough?
I think the laws we've currently got are appropriate, but the difficulty, of course, is in securing prosecutions on evidence that is drawn from intelligence sources and from transcripts of individuals talking to each other about possible actions that they might take in the future. We've not seen this just in Australia. This difficulty of using intelligence information in open criminal cases has proved very difficult for countries to get around. It's the reason why the Americans had set up the whole Gitmo process, the Guantanamo Bay and the military trials there, because the evidence gained is difficult to use in our current court system. Others have tried special courts. The Israelis have done that, special terrorism courts, where this sort of information can be securely transferred. But I think under our current laws, our difficulties will remain.
So what could be done in Australia to address those difficulties?
There's been all sorts of suggestions and recommendations, and indeed we now have an individual who is going to review all of the terrorism legislation that we have, and maybe this is part of the brief that they're going to be given. One is just the ability of courts to be able to handle very highly classified material and sources that do not and cannot be compromised. So the ability to handle electronic information, having courts where you have a number of judges who are well briefed on terrorism cases. And as we go through some of these trials in Australia, perhaps we develop a cadre of judges who are able to do that. But short of that, I'm not sure what the answer is, short of actual terrorism courts.
Well, one of the text messages intercepted from the men refers to the Holsworthy base as being a soft target. Do you think that remains the case?
Holsworthy is an interesting base, the army base in the outer suburbs of Sydney. When it was set up, of course, it was nowhere near any sort of suburban areas. It's now on the fringes of Sydney, and it is a very large and very open base. There is security there, of course. It's also been named, not just in this particular case, but of course the Willie Brigitte case was also named Holsworthy back some 6-7 years ago as a potential target. So it remains an iconic target that we know about, that people would like to attack because it is seen as the home of the army in Sydney, and it is against Australia's policies in places like sending our military forces to Iraq and Afghanistan across pelagic seas to fight in these areas, and that is one of the reasons why I think it will remain a target, although no one who I spoke to seriously considered that any such attack would be successful, given that there are pretty secure facilities there.
Just how big a threat do you think homegrown terrorism is at the moment?
The homegrown threat, it was identified in the counterterrorism white paper that was put out this year as our #1 priority for the intelligence community, and so I think the threat is real, it is growing, it is based on the fact that individuals are prepared to come to this country but go back overseas for training and operational reasons and then attempt to undertake terrorist activities here. I think you have to also remember, Heather, that Australia is the only country of the three that first went into Iraq in 2003 that has not been bombed by Al-Qaeda. Australia remains the gold medal target for Al-Qaeda and its operatives, and I still think that some sort of homegrown incident is the most likely scenario that we will face in coming years.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Heather.